All right, get ready because today we are going to dive deep into Tartaria.
Tartaria.
Yeah, this lost civilization that's really kind of captured people's imaginations.
Yeah.
And we're basing this deep dive on this really fascinating book excerpt all about it.
Right.
And we're going to see what we can learn about Tartaria from this source.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because Tartaria, I mean, it's not exactly in the history books,
Right.
but the source claims that it was like this global force.
Wow.
With technology that could have rivaled or even surpassed our own.
Yeah, and they get into some pretty crazy details.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're talking magnificent architecture, huge cities, and even geopolymer concrete.
Right. So that's one of the things that they say was a key to their building, this geopolymer concrete.
And this stuff supposedly gets stronger over time.
Yeah, so it's different from modern concrete, right?
Right.
It's got a different composition, and it uses a different binding process, and that's what gives it these unique properties.
Huh. Why do they think that they would use that?
Well, the book kind of speculates that it was more efficient,
Okay.
more sustainable.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder, like, if they really had this knowledge,
Yeah.
what else did they know?
Right, exactly. Like, what other technologies were they using?
Yeah.
And this is where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
Because the source goes on to describe these massive iron and glass structures that they say harnessed atmospheric energy.
Whoa. Hold on.
Yeah,
They're saying Tartaria was pulling energy out of thin air.
that's what they're saying. Yep.
How does that even work?
So the book dives into this whole concept of ether.
Ether.
Yeah, this unseen energy field that permeates the universe.
Okay.
And they're saying that Tartarians were able to tap into this ether and convert it into, usable energy.
Now, mainstream science doesn't really back that up, right?
No, mainstream science doesn't really recognize ether as a valid concept, let alone being able to extract energy from it.
Right.
But the source claims that Tartarians had, they figured it out.
Okay, so I'm trying to wrap my head around this whole ether thing.
Yeah.
But if we just go with it for a minute, what did they actually use this energy for?
Well, according to the book, everything.
Everything.
Yeah, they describe star forts as like energy hubs
Okay.
that were connected by this network of underground tunnels. And this network, they say it facilitated like global travel and communication.
Oh, wow.
They even talk about airships.
Wait, airships? Like blimps?
Yeah, like blimps. Exactly.
That's crazy. So they're saying free energy, airships, underground tunnels.
Yep.
This sounds like a pretty awesome society.
It does sound pretty utopian.
What's not to like about clean energy and global travel?
It's a pretty captivating picture they paint.
Right.
But we do have to remember that this is all based on their interpretations of history and architecture,
Yeah, of course.
not widely accepted evidence.
We're not just taking their word for it.
Right, exactly.
But let's just put the free energy thing aside for a second.
Right.
What about these star forts? What are those exactly?
So star forts are actually a real type of fortification.
Okay.
They emerged in the 16th century, and they're known for their star shape, right?
Right.
Which allowed for better defense against
so-
cannon fire.
Makes sense.
But the book suggests that Tartarians built these structures not just for defense, but as part of their energy network.
So they're taking something that we know exists
Right.
and giving it a whole new purpose.
Exactly.
That's pretty creative.
Yeah.
Are there any specific star forts that they talk about?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They point to examples like Fort Mortange in the Netherlands,
Okay.
Fort Jefferson in Florida, a bunch of others all around the world. And they argue that the geometry of these forts, their placement, even the underground tunnels,
Yeah.
it all points to a purpose beyond just simple defense.
Yep.
They see it as evidence of this, like, sophisticated energy network.
So they're looking at these star forts.
Yeah.
They're noticing these unusual features.
Right.
And they're interpreting it through this lens of Tartarian technology.
Exactly. They're connecting the dots in a very specific way.
To paint a whole new picture.
Yeah.
And, some people might call that a bit of a stretch.
Sure.
But it's definitely thought-provoking.
Oh, absolutely. It's thought-provoking, and that's what keeps people coming back to these theories.
Right.
It challenges what we think we know and makes us consider different perspectives.
Exactly. Exploring possibilities.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of possibilities, the book doesn't just stop at star forts.
No.
They claim that you can see Tartarian influence in other buildings around the world, too.
Right.
Things like cathedrals, palaces.
Yep.
Even some modern structures.
Yeah, they point to stylistic similarities.
Okay.
The use of specific materials. And even construction techniques that they say defy conventional explanations. They're basically saying we've been misattributing these buildings for centuries, overlooking the true architects, the Tartarians.
Now, I'm guessing that mainstream historians and architects would probably disagree with that.
Oh, yeah. Mainstream academics generally reject these claims.
Okay.
They point to well-documented evidence for the origins of these buildings.
Right.
They see it as a misinterpretation of history and architecture.
Right.
But the book pushes back on that.
Okay.
They argue that mainstream history is incomplete, perhaps even deliberately manipulated to hide the truth about Tartaria.
Okay, so they're not just saying Tartaria existed.
Right.
They're saying there's a reason that we don't know about it.
Exactly.
That it's been covered up.
Yep.
That's a whole other level.
Yeah.
Before we get into that, though,
okay,
let's stick with this technology stuff for a minute.
all right.
We keep hearing about this atmospheric energy. How do they actually harness it?
So the book gets into some pretty technical details, even if those details are based on fringe scientific concepts.
Right.
They describe the use of specific materials,
Right.
geometric shapes, even the positioning of buildings
Huh,
to
interesting.
create energetic resonance and draw energy from the ether.
So it's almost like they're describing a technology based on harnessing natural forces and frequencies.
Yeah, like they're not just pulling energy from thin air.
Right.
They're tapping into some fundamental principle of the universe.
Right.
That's the idea.
Right.
They even use terms like vibration and resonance to describe how these structures supposedly worked.
That's all very...
Esoteric,
Yeah.
and again, not something that aligns with mainstream science.
Right, alternative theories.
Yeah.
But still, it's interesting to think about, like, what if they were right?
What if?
What if we're missing out on all this?
Right.
This whole other way to understand energy.
Exactly. That's the allure of these theories. It sparks our imagination,
Makes you think.
makes us question what's possible.
And it leads to more questions.
Yeah.
Right?
Of course.
Like, if they did have all this advanced technology,
Yeah.
what happened to it?
Right. Where did it go?
Why don't we use it today? I guess those are questions for later.
Yeah, maybe.
We've still got a lot more to cover about Tartaria.
We do. It gets even more interesting
Okay.
from here.
All right. Well, I'm ready.
Let's do it. You know, I think one of the most compelling things about this whole Tartaria thing is like how they try to explain what happened to them.
Right.
Where'd they go?
Yeah.
Why don't we hear about them anymore?
Yeah, it's not like they just disappeared peacefully.
Right.
I mean, the book talks about floods, fires, earthquakes, even like directed energy weapons.
Yeah, they make it sound like it was a pretty sudden and devastating end.
Wow.
Like a multi-pronged attack. They say that maybe Tartaria was targeted by natural disasters.
Okay.
Maybe even manipulated or intensified by some unknown force.
As well as these like super advanced weapons.
Okay, wait. Back up for a second. Directed energy weapons.
Yeah.
What are we talking about here? Like lasers and death rays?
Well, the book describes them as weapons that use concentrated energy beams, possibly harnessed from that same atmospheric energy source.
Right, the ether.
Exactly.
Okay.
And, you know, this is where things get a little speculative.
Sure.
Because mainstream science doesn't really recognize these kinds of weapons.
Right.
At least not on the scale that the book is describing.
Okay.
But the source insists that these weapons were used to, like, systematically destroy Tartaria.
Wipe them out.
Yeah,
That's a pretty wild idea.
it is.
But it definitely adds to the whole mystery.
Yeah.
If they were so advanced, who could have taken them down?
Right. Who had that kind of technology?
And why would they want to do that?
That's where the book brings in another layer to the whole conspiracy.
Okay.
They talk about the New World Order,
The NWO.
the NWO.
Right. They claim that this, like, shadowy group, maybe made up of elites or secret societies,
Right.
orchestrated Tartaria's downfall.
Wow.
So they could take their technology
And control the world.
and maintain control. Yeah.
It seems like the NWO is like the villain in a lot of these alternative history theories.
They do tend to pop up a lot.
But, you know, it kind of makes you think. Like, if Tartaria did have all this amazing tech, wouldn't some people want to keep it for themselves?
A good question, right?
Wouldn't there be a motive to, like, suppress it, keep it hidden?
Yeah, I mean, that idea fuels a lot of these theories. This idea that knowledge and power are being kept from us intentionally
To control us.
to maintain control, yeah.
Okay, so we're getting into some pretty deep conspiracy stuff here.
All right.
But let's just say for a minute
Okay.
that this NWO does exist,
All right.
and they did want to destroy Tartaria.
Yeah.
How would they even do that? I mean, we're talking about a civilization that supposedly spanned the globe.
Right. They were everywhere.
Yeah.
So the book lays out this pretty elaborate scenario. They talk about orchestrated natural disasters, targeted attacks with these directed energy weapons,
Right.
and then a systematic campaign to erase Tartaria from history.
So not just like physical destruction.
Right.
But also like
A cultural distress.
erasing their memory.
Yeah.
This is starting to sound like a dystopian novel or something.
It's definitely got that element of, like, intrigue, right?
Yeah.
But we do have to remember, again, this is just one interpretation.
Right.
There's no, like, mainstream evidence to back this up.
Okay, I hear you. Got to be critical.
Yeah.
But what about evidence for Tartaria in general?
Right.
Like, how do they even know Tartaria existed in the first place?
So they point to a bunch of different things,
Okay.
like old maps and flags
Mhm.
that show a region called Tartary.
Okay.
They talk about architectural features that they say are distinctly Tartarian, and they even get into some alternative interpretations of history,
Okay, like what?
like the mud flood theory.
The mud flood? Okay, I've never heard of that.
Have you heard of that one?
No, what is that?
So it's this idea that there was this massive global flood
Mhm.
sometime in the relatively recent past,
Okay.
and it buried like entire cities and civilizations
Oh, wow.
under layers of mud.
So they're saying that this flood might have been part of the reason that Tartaria disappeared.
Yeah, and they think it was part of the cover-up. They point to buildings that have like their lower levels submerged in mud
Oh, interesting.
as evidence of this flood.
So they're looking at these muddy buildings.
Yeah,
And they're seeing evidence of like this lost civilization.
that's right.
It's like they're trying to put together a puzzle, but the pieces don't quite fit.
Exactly.
What do like geologists and historians say about this mud flood idea?
Well, mainstream science pretty much rejects the idea of a global flood on that scale,
Sure.
at least in recent history. They say there's no geological evidence for it,
Right.
and they offer other explanations for why those buildings are covered in mud.
Right. So it's like one side is seeing evidence of this global catastrophe.
Yeah.
And the other side is saying, well, there are other reasons for this.
Exactly. They're looking at the same evidence
Yeah.
and interpreting it in totally different ways.
It's really interesting how that happens, you know?
It shows how subjective history can be, right?
Well, right.
Like, whose story are you going to believe?
Whose evidence is more convincing
Yeah, those are the questions we got to ask ourselves.
when we're looking at all this stuff?
Exactly.
And it's not just about the mud flood.
Right.
They have other evidence too, right? Like old maps, flags.
Yep, they talk about maps from hundreds of years ago
Mm-hmm.
that show this big region labeled Tartary.
Okay.
And they say these maps prove Tartaria existed
Wow.
and that they were later removed from maps as part of the cover-up.
Huh. So they erased them
Erase them, yeah.
to hide the truth.
To hide the truth, exactly.
They even point to flags and symbols from old illustrations in architecture.
Yeah, they say that these are like Tartarian symbols.
So they're looking for clues everywhere.
Everywhere. Yep.
In the physical world.
Right.
In the historical record.
Exactly. They're like detectives.
Trying to piece it all together.
Trying to uncover the truth.
But are these maps and symbols really reliable evidence?
That's the question, right?
Couldn't they have other explanations?
Well, mainstream historians and cartographers have different ideas about these maps.
Okay.
They say that Tartary was just a general term for a huge, poorly understood region in Asia, not a specific civilization.
Right.
And they point out that, like, the boundaries of Tartary on those maps,
Yeah.
they change from map to map,
Interesting.
which, you know, kind of shows how little they really knew about it back then.
Right.
And they also say that those flags and symbols could have other meanings,
Okay.
not necessarily connected to Tartaria.
So again, it comes down to interpretation.
Yeah, whose interpretation are you going to buy into?
Which narrative is more convincing?
Exactly.
It seems like with these alternative theories,
Mm,
it's not always about finding the right answers,
right.
but about asking the right questions.
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
It's all about challenging assumptions, right?
Right.
Considering different perspectives and thinking critically.
Understanding that history
Yeah,
is not always as simple as we think it is.
exactly. There's always more to the story than
Yeah.
what we're initially told.
And that's the value of this whole deep dive.
Yeah.
It's not about blindly believing the Tartaria theory,
Right.
but using it as like a starting point.
Yeah. Yeah, like a springboard.
To explore, to question.
To learn more.
To broaden our understanding of history.
Exactly. That's what makes it so exciting.
This has been a really interesting conversation so far.
Yeah, me too.
But there's one thing that keeps coming up for me.
Okay, what's that?
This whole idea of Tartaria being intentionally erased.
Right.
The destruction, the cover-up, it's all pretty,
dark and dark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any, hope in all of this? Did anything survive?
That's a really good question.
Is there a Tartarian legacy?
And it's one that the book actually tries to address.
Okay.
In the last few chapters.
Mm-hmm.
They shift from all the destruction and conspiracy to a more kind of hopeful perspective.
Okay, I like that.
And they explore the potential legacy of Tartaria.
Interesting.
And how it connects to us today.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this legacy. What did they leave behind?
All right, let's get into it.
So we've talked about their rise and fall.
Right.
Their technology, the evidence.
Yeah.
Or the lack of evidence.
Right.
But what about their impact? What about Tartaria's legacy?
Well, the book suggests that their legacy is more than just, buildings and artifacts.
Okay.
They say it's a much deeper impact.
Wow. Okay, what do they mean by that?
They're saying that Tartarian descendants are still around today.
Really?
Yeah. They think their DNA is present in all sorts of populations around the world.
Huh. So even though their history's been suppressed, they're saying that their bloodlines and their culture are still out there.
That's the idea.
That's pretty wild. But is there any evidence for that?
Well, that's where things get a little more speculative.
Yeah.
The book points to, genetic studies that show connections between different populations. Mm-hmm. And they say that maybe, just maybe, there's a common ancestor that could be linked back to Tartaria.
So they're looking for connections, echoes of Tartaria.
Right.
In our world today.
Yeah, they're trying to reconstruct a lost history by looking at fragments of culture, genetics, folklore.
That's a really interesting approach.
It is.
Even if it's not, super scientific.
Yeah, it's more about asking questions than providing hard evidence. But that's part of what makes this whole Tartaria thing so fascinating, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It encourages us to look at the world in new ways.
And the book doesn't stop at just the cultural and genetic legacy.
No, they go further.
They also suggest that Tartaria's technology was suppressed.
Especially their knowledge of energy. Yeah. They believe that it's still happening today.
Wow.
That we're being kept from these clean and abundant energy sources.
Okay, so it's like a conspiracy within a conspiracy.
Right. Yeah.
Not only was Tartaria destroyed, but their knowledge was stolen and hidden.
Exactly. And they say it's to keep us dependent on outdated and destructive energy systems.
That's a really powerful idea.
It is.
But is there any evidence for that?
They point to examples of inventors and scientists who claim to have discovered new energy technologies. But then they were silenced, discredited, even disappeared.
Wow.
They see a pattern of suppression.
It's like they're saying there's a hidden war going on.
A war on free energy.
Yeah, a fight for a better future that we don't even know about.
That's the idea.
That's pretty intense.
It is pretty intense.
And I'm sure mainstream science and industry would probably disagree.
Oh, absolutely.
But the book's point is that we've been conditioned to dismiss anything that challenges the status quo.
Even when it comes to something as important as energy.
It's a call to think for ourselves.
Exactly.
To question authority.
To be open to new ideas.
To be open-minded.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Tartaria, I think we're left with more questions than answers.
I think that's fair to say.
But that's not necessarily a bad thing, right?
No, not at all.
Sometimes the best journeys are the ones that lead us to ask better questions.
Couldn't agree more.
So, to our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep researching,
keep questioning,
and draw your own conclusions.
Yeah, the world of Tartaria. It's a rabbit hole of possibilities.
It is.
Who knows what you might find?
Until next time.
Keep diving deep.